while we were floating, we can make the announcement that we are going on a little break starting next week because school is finishing up and there's graduations and stuff, and then the kids are home between school and camp, but we will resume again in July for at least a month, and then we'll see what happens after that. So, but yes, exactly. Then we'll continue in Yerushalayim. Um, yeah. So next 2 weeks for sure we're off, and then we'll see after that when we start again in July. Um, so this week is Parshas Beha'aloscha. Before we get into what we're going to learn about Beha'aloscha, I wanted to start with a little introduction. We're going to talk about a little bit about education today. And obviously, when we think about education, education is really a cornerstone of Judaism, both on a religious level, a cultural level, that obviously education has always been extremely important and extremely valued. Often when the question of the success of the Jewish people comes up, the answer to that is the fact that we emphasize education so much and that education is so important to us. And when we're going to be talking about education, of course, there's the standard concept of educating others, which is the typical construct that we think of adults educating children or, having influence on somebody else. But at a certain point in your life, you need to start educating yourself because education never really ends, right? Learning never ends, growing never ends. And the only way we can continue to grow is if we continue to learn. And the older we get, the more we're able to even gain out of our learning and out of our education, because we have so much more life tools to utilize with our education. But at some point, we're no longer in school. And so no one is forcing us to go to school. No one is forcing us to learn, and not just learn, as we're going to see over here, that education doesn't mean just learning, but no one is forcing us to really like mold our own path. And at some point, that motivation has to come from within, which doesn't mean that it needs to be always self-taught. Always, which even if you do want to be self-taught, there are so many resources today available to actually teach yourself. There are so many things, not when it comes to Torah necessarily per se, but there are so many things I've taught myself over the past couple of years using the wonderful tools of like YouTube, and you could really learn how to do anything. I fix my own shoes. I'm just that type of person that I like to do things for myself. So I look on YouTube, and whenever I can do something myself, I do. So there is so much available for us to actually self-educate. But at the same time, I think a huge part of self-education is finding the right teachers for yourself, because not everyone relates to the same people. So it's about that pursuit of finding the right teachers, finding the right mentors, finding the right people to sort of shape our educational path and educational journey. And it says Chanech l'nar al pi darkai, that we should educate the student according to his or her own path. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Chabad Rebbe, actually wrote a whole book called Kalei Chinuch v'Hadracha, which is about education. And a huge section of the book, he talks about that what is the main job of an educator. Really, the main job of an educator is to get to know his or her students. That education can only begin, true education, where, like we said before, where you're really forming who the person is and what path they're going to take, and an education that is lasting, and that, right, because we know that you can be in school for a number of years, and do I remember, I'm sorry to my math teachers, they were great, but do I remember the algebra that I learned in high school, or any of the math that I learned in high school? I do not. I couldn't do any of those problems. If you paid me a lot of money, I still couldn't do them because I just totally forgot that. So we're not talking about those types of lessons. We're talking about the lessons that stay with you after you are no longer in that setting anymore. And then our hope is that a student goes out into the world and is faced with a scenario that they've actually never met before, and they weren't even told that they would meet it, because that's what happens in life, right? Things come up that are completely unexpected, that we would never expect that this is the situation that this student would be in. And so I can't prepare you directly for this experience, but the hope with education is that you will have enough tools that you'll be able to pull out from within yourself, from the resources that the teacher gave the student, that in any situation, they will have those resources to deal with any situation. And so much of that is only going to happen if that education is super like individuated to each particular student, and to really know each particular student. In the school system that we currently have, there's often a lot of kids in a classroom, right? Like 20, 25 kids in a classroom. It's very difficult to get to know every single student and really understand, as the Frida Greppa goes on, about their personality, about their home life, about their backgrounds, about, where do they come from? But through understanding where they come from and what their whole inner makeup is, I am so much better able to target the lessons to them in a way that they can understand and internalize and take it in a very specific way that will really enhance them. So much of the power in education comes from that knowledge of the student and from the embracing of the individual. So instead of coming in with like a sort of ideal, I think sometimes we feel this way, that like the school has an ideal student that would come out of it, right? And that ideal student has like a specific picture, a specific look, a specific job that they have, a specific path that they take. And this is the ideal student that comes out of this place, right? But if I really am speaking on an individual level, then there is no ideal student that comes out. There's no picture I'm trying to create. There can be so many different paths. Even when it comes to our religious life, right? Our mission, or put it this way, our goal is the same, right? Our goal is one. Our goal is to make a dir b'tachtenim, to bring God into this world in a revealed way. That's our goal. But our missions are all different. So the way that we are going to achieve that goal, each person has their very own unique individual path that they're going to take to achieve that goal. And it's going to look, each one person's path is going to look very different than somebody else's. And if we want to reach, if, like we said, the ultimate goal is to really flood the entire world with godly light, that mission needs to be different, because it would be impossible for one person to be able to reach every single climate and every single space. And it's only through our own unique individuality that we're able to access the entire world. It's only through our unique selves that we're able to target that space that I can uniquely target. So the importance of the individual in education it really can't be it can't be underemphasized. It's so important. And I think that so often we move in the other direction of, we're happy when sort of everyone comes out looking a little bit the same, when everyone's on the same level and has the same knowledge, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that sort of feels like we've accomplished something, instead of really, really focusing on that individual and recognizing the importance of the individual. And so the reason I brought this up today is, in this week's Parsha, we have we start off with the Menorah, talking about the Menorah, and talking about the lighting of the Menorah, the creating of the Menorah. So the Menorah represents every Jew. Every Jew is a living menorah. It says, Kiner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that the soul of a Jew is the light of Hashem. The light of Hashem is the soul of the Jew. That within each of us, there burns the light of Hashem. Every single one of us has a menorah inside of us. And we can learn from the Menorah, both on the level of educating others and also on the level of self-education, of how we can really step up into this role of our ultimate mission, which is to be the light That is, like we said, our ultimate goal is to be the light, and each in our own unique individual way can achieve being that light. And even just starting with the general idea of the menorah was made of one piece of gold. That was like the most important rule of the menorah, was that you couldn't put together a bunch of, normally if you're making an elaborate piece of metal work, and it has 7 branches and a stem and all these different bulbs and different parts, you would make the little pieces out of individual pieces of gold, and then you can, I don't know exactly, I'm not a goldsmith, but you could sort of weld them together, melt them all together so that they'd create this one big piece. But the menorah was meant to be made out of one block of gold, and all the individual detailing was all carved out of this single block. So it was just about rearranging this one block of gold. The gold becomes malleable as it's heated up, and then they're able to fashion the menorah out of this single block of gold. And already with that fact, we learn this original message that we just said about education from the menorah, that even if we have one goal, right? Even if we have one goal in life, we're all working from the same one block of gold. Nevertheless, there are still 7 branches. There are still multiple paths to achieving that goal. There's not just one derech avodah. There's not just one way of connecting with Hashem. There are so many different ways and so many different paths that a person can take to connect with Hashem. And that's already something that we learn from the menorahs, is this power of the individual. The fact that there is space for the individual, and there is space to take a unique path, as long as it is from this singular block of gold, meaning as long as it is connected to the singular mission, that mission can take many different faces. It doesn't have to look exactly the same, as long as it's anchored to the core. And when we open up this parsha, there's a very interesting wording that is used. It says, the parsha is called B'ha'aleischa, and the phrase is B'ha'aleischa es haneros, when you raise up the candles. And that's a very strange language. Normally, when we're talking about, what are we talking? We won't even be sure necessarily what we're talking about over here. What does it mean to raise up the candles? What it means is when he lights the candles, right? So instead of saying when he lights the candles, it says when you rise up the candles. And Rashi explains on this word, and this is a very famous Rashi, that when the Kohen or Kohen Gadol is lighting the menorah, the way that we light it, and this is something that we do in our homes on Hanukkah as well, we learned from this, is that we wait until you keep the candle on the wick until the fire rises for itself. So, you can let it catch, and the second it catches, you could pull it away, and then it will continue for itself. Or you hold it on a little longer until you're sure that the fire is completely on the wick and burning for itself before you remove the original candle. And from this Rashi, we're going to learn a number of different points about education from the words of this Rashi. So to begin, so the words that Rashi says is, until the flame rises up on its own. Until the flame rises up on its own. So number one is this concept of the flame. And this is also in helping us understand what exactly is our role as an educator. And again, like I said before, anyone can be an educator, whether you're a parent, whether you're actually teaching somebody else, whether you're just a presence in this world of an observant Jew who is showing the light of Hashem in their own way, whether you're educating yourself, right? So what is the goal of education? Number one, the goal of education is to create a flame. Because we can have a candelabra, we can have a lamp, and a lamp can exist, and every single person is a lamp. And what is a lamp? A lamp is something with the potential to create light. So we all have the potential to create light. Every human being has a potential to be a light in this world. And really, everything that we interact with, every single thing, every single encounter that we have, there's 2 directions it can go. This is just the way Hashem created the world. Every single moment we have these opportunities either to reveal or conceal. We can either reveal godliness or conceal godliness, and we're constantly making that choice all the time. And that means that this world is full of lamp potential. And what is the point? The point is to bring that lamp to a flame, to light the lamp, that it's no longer just an empty lamp, but to turn that flame on. And that's really what education is. It's about revealing the potential that's already there, right? We all have this potential to be a source of light. We are all created as sources of light. Like I mentioned before, it says, Ner Havaya Nishmas Adam, that our souls are already burning, but not with a revealed flame all the time. And so the role of education is to take that lamp from potential into reality, to reveal the flame that's already there. And automatically, when you come in with that perspective, it changes the way that you interact with your potential student. Because it's not about, oh, I'm giving you something that you don't have. It's about, and this goes back to why it's so important to get to know who they are. It's about, let's see what your light is. And that's a very powerful experience for the students as well, because they know that their teacher believes in them, that they know that the teacher sees their light. And so in order for you to be able to bring the flame to the student, you need to see the light that's inside the student. And that's really, that's one of the biggest and probably most challenging jobs on the teacher, is to be able to do that, to really see the light that's inside. And sometimes you can have a very challenging student or someone who seems very resistant and seems to be living in like a state of darkness, in a very thick state of darkness. But the number one step in education is to be able to see the light that's there, to recognize that there's potential there, and from that state of potential, to draw it out into reality. And often just by seeing it, that already draws it out into reality, right? When somebody else recognizes the goodness in somebody else, that draws out that goodness. When somebody else recognizes the beauty of somebody else's soul, that draws it out. It's like a magnet, right? If you think about the fact that the soul can be buried under layers of other experiences, right? The animal soul experience, the body experience, and the soul is buried beneath all of this. But it exists and it's there. And all it needs is like that magnet to draw it out. And that first layer of magnet is my belief that it exists. And either sometimes we have to do that for ourselves, and sometimes we do that for somebody else. Believing that it exists and somebody else is able to draw that light out. And that's a very powerful thing. Okay, so that was the first word in Rashi, that the flame. Then he says that it rises, right? And so we're going to stop at this word as well, rises. The nature of the flame is upward mobility. And that's really if we're going to talk about what is education, what are we imparting in our students, what do we impart in ourselves when we self-educate, is that our motion is upward, that our goal is to be constantly evolving and changing, right? That is who we are. We're constantly going to be evolving and changing. Our souls are flames. The flame is always going up. And through proper education, it's sort of like, what is proper education? Is lighting that fire inside the student, that they have this constant drive and this constant motivation to rise up and to be growing and to be changing and to be becoming a better person, to be constantly impacting the world. But it's not enough that it rises up. Like we said before, it needs to rise up on its own. So right now, the student is still in classroom with me. So I can give it this energy. I can provide it with its light. I can hold my light to its light, and that will draw it out. But we need to know that the teacher is not always going to be there. The teacher is going to leave eventually. So at some point, there's going to be this distance, and the student needs to rise up on their own. It's not enough to just provide the light for them. The goal is to create a reality where, first of all, the student has enough tools that they can be, like we said before, at some point you become a self-educator. So the student needs to have enough tools that they can become self-educated. So the goal of education is not just, like I said before, why is it that I don't remember the algebra? I'm sure I have classmates maybe who are working. I will take a classmate who's working as an actuary, a friend of mine. So she probably uses the algebra. Maybe, I don't even know, honestly, but she might use that part of her education that I completely have neglected and have no use for. But why is it that I don't remember the algebra? A big part of it is because I never really understood the functions of how things worked. I learned the formulas, I memorized them, and I did them. So that means that I received information, but I didn't really receive tools. And maybe at that age, it wasn't even appropriate for me to really receive the tools. Maybe if I then decided to pursue mathematics more seriously, it would have been appropriate for me to receive the tools. It could be that my mind couldn't have handled the tools at that time. But in that time, in that space, and this is what happens with a lot of the education we receive, is that we receive information and not tools to create that information for ourselves, to pursue the knowledge for ourselves. And again, like we said, it has a time and a place. But as soon as the teacher leaves, poof, that's gone. Give it 2 years and it's gone. But we want the light to go on its own. And the only way for the light to go on its own is, first of all, to give the student the tools to be able to pursue the knowledge on their own, to be able to pursue the knowledge for themselves, to be able to open a book for themselves, to be able to follow their own curiosity and find that knowledge for themselves. So that's on one level, on the level of like just a very practical tool to be empowered to be able to find the information for themselves. And then take it a step deeper, is that it's transmitted in a way that the information is transmitted in a way that it's internalized deeply. That it's a lesson that's not just something that's up here, but it's something that it comes deeply into my heart. And if it comes deeply into my heart and it becomes my worldview, then I'm gonna take it with me even on my own after I leave that room. And the last level of it being on my own is that ultimately, really what is the ultimate goal is to create that the motivation should also come on its own. Because it's very easy to stay motivated when you have a cheerleader standing outside who is creating charts for you, who's creating goals for you, who's giving you a grade on a test, right? So when we have external factors that are cheering us on, motivating us, it's much easier to stay in a space of education, to stay in a space of learning. It's much, much, much harder when that motivation has to come from within. When I need to make the effort to show up to the class, or I need to make the effort to show up to my learning and to work on my learning, that takes a lot more work. But that can be created by the teacher earlier on to really put, like we said before, to light a fire in the student, that they realize that this is what gives me life. This is what gives me energy. When I'm in a constant state of growth and learning, when my own flame is revealed, this is the ultimate state for me to be in. That this feels better than anything else. That this feels better than any other pursuit. This pursuit is the greatest pursuit. And when we are able to invoke that in somebody else, then not only does the flame go up on its own, once they have their own flame, they too can become a lamplighter, right? Once the student has its own flame, it could take its flame and light somebody, they could take their flame and light somebody else's wick. So there's so much power in receiving this motivation for ourselves and receiving this light for ourselves. And it's so important that when we're teaching, it's not just a casual passing along of information where I don't wait to see, did this catch? We have to make sure to see, did this catch? Is it awesome? That's really, that really is the ultimate goal. Not to create a million people who look the same, but to create somebody who is fully lit up from within. And so that's one reading into the beginning of this week's Parsha. But I think that one relates a lot more to educating somebody else, even though I do think we could apply these principles also to self-education. But a lot of these principles really apply to educating somebody else. Then I was looking at the Likutei Torah for this week, and here the Alter Rebbe really talks a lot about using the Menorah as a meditation for our own personal growth, for the self-education, as we mentioned earlier, that at some point we need to take ownership for our own education. And so I wanted to bring out a few points. We're not going to go through, it's obviously, Maimarim and Likutei Torah are very deep and dense, and so we're not going to go through the whole thing in the 15 minutes that we have. But just a couple of points from this mimer that I thought were applicable to our own, like we said before, self-education. So he also speaks about the fact that the Menorah is made up of one block of gold, right? So again, comparing the human being to the Menorah, and how we're all made up, how the Menorah is made up of one block of gold, and then again, things are shifted around. And so he talks a lot about this concept that you sort of have this block, and then, again, I'm not so, has anyone ever seen a goldsmith work? I think like a goldsmith work. No. So there's some, there's basically the way the goldsmith work, I'm thinking a lot about, in my mind, the easiest example for me to think would be like clay, right? When you have like a block of clay and then you're forming it into a certain shape. So you see how like parts of the clay from the bottom go up, parts of the clay from the top go to the bottom, right? And you're just shifting the existing structure around a little bit. So the Alter Rebbe talks about how similarly with the Menorah, it was all created out of one piece of gold, but it's just sort of shifted around the material a little bit. And he speaks about how really this is our main work in life. One of our main works in life is to just shift around what exists within us. We're born with a very strong reality of that the material world is what is important, and that the spiritual world is something that can sometimes be secondary to us. And not just that, it's like the physical world is our foremost lens, and our spiritual life is a very secondary lens of how we view the world. And that's how we're created. We're created as very needy children who don't even, children are not born with really such a strong understanding of the spiritual. And even like the child's understanding of the spiritual is often very physical, right? It's a very like, it needs to be made tangible for them to be able to understand it, because the child's mind is very physical. And so what is our avodah in life as we are self-educating is to start taking that piece of gold that we had and shifting things around. Take something that maybe was on the bottom and shift it to the top, and some material that was on the top and shift it to the bottom. And as we grow, I think naturally our priorities shift, but also we can make it an effort to shift our priorities. That I can start de-emphasizing my material life and maybe start emphasizing more strongly my spiritual life. And what's interesting is, what are we saying over here? We're not saying to get rid of your material life, to destroy it. It's still going to be there. It's still going to be part of the structure, because like we said before, we're just shifting things around, which means it's still going to be there. It's still going to be a part of me. I think sometimes we have a fear that if we pursue our relationship with Hashem, that what's going to happen to certain physical priorities that we have. You know, what's going to happen to my physical health, some of my friendships and relationships that I have, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's fear of what's going to happen to those other parts of myself. And I think this can be very comforting to know it's not that they're being destroyed, they're just being shifted to another space. They're shifted to a little bit lower on the priority list. Doesn't mean that they're gone. They're still totally a part of me and have their place, because they're not bad, they're just not the top priority. So with this shifting, we have this ability to still maintain them, but just to lessen their importance a little bit, and to then strengthen the importance of the things that are actually truly important, right? So that's one thing that we learn from the shape of the Menorah. Another interesting thing about the Menorah, like we said before, is that all of the different parts, every single last little part, were all like I don't know, there were like different shapes on the top of the Menorah, and there were like the cups and the shapes, and it was an elaborate design, and it was all created from the same block of gold. And so similarly, the Alter Rebbe says that the entire Jewish nation as a whole really were all created from the same block of gold. So there are the people who are maybe the flowers on the top, and they look like much more beautiful and more holy on some level, we might think. The people who are the flowers on the top. And then there's like the stumpy shape on the bottom or whatever, like the people that maybe think of themselves as being on the bottom. And sometimes when we're in a situation where we're trying to work on ourselves and we're like, I'm such a not a holy person. I'm so disconnected from God. How can I pull myself out from this space? How can I lift myself up? Again, how can I educate myself at this space in my life? I feel so far from God. I feel so disconnected. And Hashem says, we're all created from the same gold of the menorah. We're all created from the same gold of the menorah. And so if I connect myself to, I have the ability to connect myself to somebody who is greater than me. And together with them, together with their power, I can be lifted up out of the space that I'm in. And this is one of the roles of tzaddikim. It's that a tzaddik is not created from different stuff than us, right? A tzaddik is also made from the same gold. And when I connect myself to the tzaddik, I can receive aid from the tzaddik, that I can be lifted out of whatever state that I'm in personally, where I feel like I'm so far, I feel like I'm in the base, and I can be lifted up from the base and be brought up to a much higher level, right? So even though we seem on some level to be so distant from each other, at the end of the day, we all have that same light of Hashem inside of us. And we're all created from that same piece of gold. And similarly, that also reflects on the way that we judge other people. That sometimes we look down at others, and we think that they're, much lower than us or doing something wrong. And then we take a step back and we recognize, no, we're all miksha from this one piece of gold. We're all carved out from this one piece of gold. And I don't know where that person necessarily is getting their energy from. And I don't know all I know is that we are all created from the same space. And maybe, so I don't know I can't judge somebody else just because they look different from me. And then lastly, is that the menorah, and this is the last point in our self-education. The menorah is made out of gold. And in Chassidus and Kabbalah, gold always represents passion. Silver is cool, it's calm, versus gold is warm, it's fire, it's passion. And in order for us to remain self-motivated, we need that fire and passion. Without fire and passion, we become very complacent. We become everything's okay. And so that fire and passion is so necessary for our self-education. But how are we supposed to have this fire and passion? How is it that it's difficult to maintain a life of excitement towards God? We have our seasons. There are times that we're more inspired. There are times that we're less inspired. How are we supposed to cultivate this passion for ourselves? And the Alter Rebbe discusses that really the key to that passion is in our own hands. That we all have the ability to cultivate love, a fiery love of Hashem. And this is something that really you have to spend a lot of time learning, and you can't just expect it to come on its own. But when we delve into, Hashem gave us the Torah, and Hashem gave us wisdom for us to delve into, to learn, and through that we ignite the fire in our soul. And even more than that, it's the power of prayer. Prayer is the time when, if we spend some time in meditation and we really think about, specifically like Psukei de Zimra, when we think about the portion of the davening where we talk about Hashem creating the world and the beauty of the world and the immense vastness of the world and the vastness of creation, when we spend time in meditation on this, which is not so easy to do, but if we take the time to really cultivate this power of meditation and contemplation, of really starting to appreciate God's greatness, what that does is it fires us up. It lights the fire within us and allows us to maintain this energy and motivation and this gold energy of fire. So that is another part of our self-education, is that it's not just enough to learn, but after we're finished learning, we need to take the time to meditate on what we learn, because until we meditate on what we learn, we don't ignite emotions. And when we take the time to really meditate, contemplate, bring this into our reality, then we're able to have an emotional response. And from that emotional response, we have our motivation. So when you want to create a motivation for yourself, that is done through the power of meditation. So yeah, these are just some lessons from the Menorah, both about educating others, but also about educating ourselves so that we can really become sources of light. And as sources of light, then share that light with others.